The God Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, the leader of the Imperium, if only in the most technical of senses, and an all-around pretty important dude to the setting. Some people love him, some people hate him. I'm in this second group because it gives you plenty of reasons to dislike him, and if I'm being frank, it's out of bitterness and spite in no small part. Everyone's allowed to dislike the elves, but the moment someone harasses the Emperor a bit, that's too far, and you just don't know what you're talking about. But ignoring my constant bitter complaining, today we'll not be moaning about Big E too much. Instead, I want to consider a question his existence poses. Why isn't there a second emperor? Why is there not a second nearly all-powerful deity running around combating chaos in the name of glorious mankind? Or for that matter, why don't some other factions have an equivalent to Big E on their side? And why don't people try and make another one? These are all questions that I'm tricking myself into believing are interesting and worth discussing, and I truly hope you fall for that same lie as well. So today will be a very simple topic, because everyone in the field of Warhammer slop has to talk about the Emperor every now and again, or be shot down by the true God Emperor, the YouTube algorithm. Let's see today how we can potentially make another God Emperor of mankind, or at least another powerful god that isn't a chaos god. How easy some of the different routes may be, what hurdles would get in the way, and how other non-human races may either potentially do so or have already done so in their own special little ways. But before we begin, tell me something. Do you have a dog? I do. Dogs are man's best friend, and man's best friend should eat well. And for that purpose, we have the Farmer's Dog, the sponsor of this video. Farmer's Dog makes some of the best dog food around that gives your dog the healthiest diet they can have. The ingredients are all fresh and gently cooked to eliminate any potential pathogens while preserving vital nutrients and moisture. Who doesn't want their best bud to have an easier time digesting their food that keeps them healthy than just highly processed food? And I noticed my pup had a softer coat too, which is great for the dog and great for you when you're petting the dog. Double the win right there. And because the Farmer's Dog delivers right to your front door, there's no need to wander around a pet store looking at 1,000 different brands and having no idea what's best for your dog. Athena is a bit of a picky eater sometimes. Maybe she'll scarf the food down, maybe she'll just stare at me while she eats. When her order of the Farmer's Dog arrived, I wasn't totally sure she'd eat it, but she really seemed to love it. After sniffing the bowl for a bit, she cleaned out all the food I put in. When I switched her food before, sometimes she wouldn't eat much, if any of it, but on the first try, she scarfed it down and she's been perfectly happy to keep having it. And since it's tailored to her needs, she's happy getting high quality food, and I'm happy knowing she's eating healthy. And just to convince you the Farmer's Dog is right for your pet, here's an offer from me to you. Using my link or by scanning the QR code, you can get 50% off your first box of the Farmer's Dog. Not only that, you'll also be getting free shipping as well as 24/7 customer support for any questions you may have. So what are you waiting for? Get the Farmer's Dog today so your best animal bud can eat and be their best. Now then, time to craft ourselves an Emperor. The Emperor of Mankind's origin story has already been through the ringer plenty of times between the retcon stick and intentionally vague origins to give people room for thought of their own. The funniest possibility I've heard of is that anything you might have heard is just a lie he says to make himself seem more grand because no one can prove him wrong. That being said, we can peg him down as at least being around since around 8000 BC, since the OG fluff about him had him born about that point, and newer lore he went by the name of Neoth during the time period mankind was making the first cities. Elenius Pius / Elanius Persson, or whatever they're calling him nowadays, may be older than him, but he's about it. Out of all the possible origins for him I've found, most of them come from about this point in time, so we'll start going through them from here on out. Possibility 1. The classic origin of a whole bunch of human shamans sacrificing themselves to be reborn into one super entity that would eventually become the God Emperor of mankind. This is one of the most straightforward theories as to how the Emperor came to be, because it's just the Dragon Ball Z fusion dance times however many shamans were present. 2 plus 2 plus however many 2s doesn't just equal the total of the addition, it also multiplies it. While this lore hasn't been strictly speaking canon for some time, assuming it was done, you could in theory recreate the process and bring about another superpowered being like the Emperor. So why not do that? Unfortunately, there's a whole load of reasons as to why this isn't feasible. Let's start with the process itself. The shamans did this to protect humanity from all that scary stuff that exists in the universe, but as much as the war in heaven did turn the Sea of Souls into the magnificent shithole that is the warp, it still wasn't as bad as it would become by 40k times proper. Slaanesh had yet to be born yet, and depending on which lore you're reading, the rest of the Chaos Gods weren't even around yet either when the shamans merged. Yes, I know once they're born, they've always been born, but I still believe their influence at the time of the Emperor's birth would have been much lesser. The reincarnation process would have had much less in the way of enemies intervening than it would nowadays, where all 4 Chaos Gods would no doubt be interfering in any such process that would create more Big E's. Even the half-dead couch potato that is the current Emperor is giving them plenty of trouble with how insanely powerful he is as a god. Why would they let someone make a second one? For a far more mundane reason, the Imperium needs psychers both as troops and to feed the current Emperor. As much as you're supposed to fear the mutant and abhor the witch, dictatorships tend to have zero issues ignoring their dogma when it suits them, so you can find plenty of sanctioned psychers fighting on the battlefield or in inquisitorial parties. Big E also needs to chow down on a good few thousand of them a week to keep the Galactic Lighthouse active. Getting some important inquisitor or priest to gather up a whole load of psychers to make another Big E with will likely be seen as, and very well may be, a gross waste of resources that are needed elsewhere. This would incidentally also almost certainly get you shot for heresy, because you are setting out to create another God Emperor, which implies the current one isn't good enough for you. All of this is breezing by the fact the specifics of the ritual need to be discovered, and that your efforts won't just create a pile of dead psychers, or a warp portal. But let's say it works. You get a whole bunch of psychers together, you get them to all kill themselves and merge into one gestalt entity, and you don't get murdered along the way for heresy. Great. The Emperor, as far as I understand things anyway, didn't pop into existence as a 10-foot-tall golden god. He came into his powers pretty quickly, but there was some growing to be done to reach the full extent. It's likely that initially all you'll have from this ritual is a newborn baby. They may be destined for greatness, but so are the Primarchs, and that didn't keep them from getting dunked into hell or falling to chaos. You'll need to keep Baby Emperor 2.0 safe for as long as it takes them to develop their powers, during which time Chaos will certainly be beelining to corrupt or kill them to prevent them from becoming an issue. Allow me to insert another potential problem as well. Emotions affect the warp in reality in 40K. Your beliefs and feelings manifest as real and tangible things in another dimension, or at least as real and tangible as anything can be in the warp. Merging with demons is also a thing people do here, and it tends to be very unhealthy for the body and soul of whoever is getting possessed. Now, go back to the original psychers you gathered to sacrifice and merge. Even ignoring the possibility of someone like Tzeentch having infiltrated a corrupt psyker to ruin things, if every single one of them isn't on the same page with sacrificing themselves to merge for the greater good, the process is ruined. It almost certainly won't work, and in the worst case scenario, it will work, but the relatively soon-to-be all-powerful being you've created is going to tear itself apart. The conflicting feelings and emotions could do anything from making this new Emperor self-destruct to making them absolutely insane, as the various different goals and beliefs of the Psychers all conflict in this new merged being. If you take this origin as still canon, this can even explain why the Emperor acts completely contradictory to himself on different occasions. All the shamans wanted to preserve humanity, which is why he isn't incoherent and can work towards that grand goal, but as for how he acts on a day-to-day basis, one day he says the Primarchs are his sons, the next they're just generals, the next they're not even named but given numbers, and the next he essentially tells Angron he doesn't care about him and just wants a general for his armies. Rinse and repeat at random from day to day, with plenty of more conflicting actions and beliefs thrown in for good measure. The Emperor may be like this because his soul is made of 1,000 different people fighting over which course of action and mentality is best. If the people in your recreation of this aren't all on the same page at some base level, you've at best created the worst case of dissociative identity disorder ever seen. And at worst, you've created a monster that's going to go on a literally insane rampage across time and space. Let's scale things back just a little bit though. Big E is a perpetual, that's what newer canon has gone with. This can be reconciled with the shaman theory, but for argument's sake and to bring up some new points, let's assume these are separate things. Big E was noted by Erda to always have been a league above the other perpetuals, who themselves are all immortal beings with supernatural powers. You can also create new perpetuals, as evidenced by, among other things, Vulcan existing. So why not try and go that route? This theory has far more mundane reasons as to why it likely isn't possible. When Big E created Vulcan, he created a being far less powerful than himself. Don't get me wrong, Vulcan's a badass, but he's absolutely not a second God Emperor. It's entirely possible that creating another perpetual on the scale of Neoth just can't be done, otherwise Big E would have done just that. There is, if you'll forgive me a moment of cynicism, the possibility Big E chose not to do so because he didn't want someone of roughly equal power potentially disagreeing with him, but that argument to me dwindles out pretty quick on how far you can discuss it. The explanation just comes around to the Emperor being a dictator not wanting to share power, which is boring, if probably true. See him saying the difference is I know I am right, and the last church is proof of that. The Imperium is many things, but democratic isn't one of them, even if individual democracies do exist across a few of the million worlds it controls. Assuming the explanation for Big E being so much more powerful than the other perpetuals isn't just him being built different, it could in theory be possible you can make something like him again. The problem comes from the fact that whatever circumstances gave birth to the Emperor are completely lost to time. He wasn't exactly an open book at the best of times, even assuming he didn't erase his origins intentionally, and they were almost certainly kept under lock and key to prevent misuse, again assuming he didn't just come into being that powerful. And I will get to Moloch, don't worry. Right now I'm operating under the the assumption we don't need to worry about it just yet, and the power can be achieved without going to that place, in which case the answer for getting it ranges from we just don't know how to do it to he's just like that and there's nothing we can do to recreate him. Towards the end of the Horus Heresy, Magnus fried Malcador and another perpetual sacrificed herself to bring him back, which is another dead end for this theory as well. Even if you give someone perpetual status from yourself, they don't seem to come back any stronger than they were, they just come back. So why not skip the steps that involve mortals if they seem to be so tricky? Why don't you just go ahead and make a god outright? Funny enough, I think full-on creating a god is a bit more feasible due to both how 40k works and the different ways you can go about doing it. The first is simple worship and belief. Since belief, channeled worship, and repeated actions with intense enough emotions behind them can cause a god to form, could you focus all the efforts of a large enough group of people on creating a second god emperor? The answer is yes, it's feasible to do, but making a massively powerful emperor-tier god is going to be a lot harder than holding hands around a campfire and singing Kumbaya. The Tau have accidentally done this with the psychically active races they've absorbed into their empire with the Tauva. It's not exactly the most active of deities in the setting, but the belief over the Tau's greater good did make a new divine being. And while obviously the specifics of it should be avoided, the Eldar did create Slanesh through rampant hedonism. Maybe a new god could be made along the lines of what the Emperor is all about by worshipping it in slightly different ways. Think about how some cultures like the ancient Greeks had multiple gods of war, for example. The current Emperor is the guiding ruler of humanity, and this new secondary god Emperor could be something like the dedicated sword or shield of mankind. And that's not even all the ways to make a god, believe it or not. The old ones seem to have a penchant for this depending on how you read the specifics of the Eldar's origins. Maybe their gods already existed and were simply given a power boost by the old ones. Or maybe the old ones straight up made the Eldar gods, or in fact were the Eldar gods. Or the old ones created the Eldar gods, but they were just weapons to be summoned and used by the mortal Eldar, and because of their immense power, the Eldar worshipped them as gods, which caused them to become as gods. And while there are differences between how chaos works in 40k and fantasy, they're similar enough that you could use similar methods of uplifting a spirit to godhood. The 4th edition Fantasy Roleplay Core rulebook mentions that with enough belief, a local spirit can become a god proper, and between Talva and things like the World Spirit of Fenris, there's evidence similar beings do exist in 40k. Let's start with the old one's methods first. The problem here is very straightforward. If you look at a 40k galaxy map and try to find an old one, you'll be looking forever because they're all dead. Maybe one of them was part of the Cabal by the time of the Horus Heresy, but they died, so it doesn't matter either way anymore. Now, the old ones were pretty much the masters of the warp from both their immense power and knowledge. You don't create the orcs and either create or uplift the Eldar if you don't have some serious energy and know-how to pour into projects like those. While there was at least one entire pantheon of deities like that, the Eldar pantheon, there's no one left to tell you how to make gods like that anymore. The old ones are all dead, and most of the Eldar gods are in Slanesh's gut. Iniad wasn't made by the old ones, so he doesn't count. Isha is locked in the Nurgle jar, so she's out for asking too, and I guess in theory you could ask Kegarak. If you think asking the Jester god in charge of a legion of followers that don't like guests in their house is going to result in a straight answer, or really any end result other than your death, then go ahead. You can ask Ahriman how that goes for him when he tries. This is also assuming it's still possible given the nature of the warp. Like with the shaman theory, the old ones made these gods at a time when the warp wasn't quite the warp yet. The war in heaven was what made the warp all screwy, and while yes, it was definitely getting screwy by the time they would have felt the need to make Cain, it wasn't what it was by modern 40k. It might just be the case that it can't happen any longer. The warp's too unstable to form a god this way anymore. Such a titanic project of soul creation, or whatever you want to call it, just isn't in the cards. As for worship making a new god, that runs into problems of overlapping territory. The Emperor is already worshipped in a million different aspects across the Imperium. Sometimes he's the Emperor, recognizable as the Emperor of mankind, even if the specifics of things like the Horus Heresy and 9 of his kids turning against him aren't really taught to the average Imperial. Sometimes he's more of a Zeus or Odin-like figure, even if without the accompanying pantheon of other gods. Sometimes he's worshipped as a generic Sky Father figure. Sometimes he might just be a spirit that flows through everyone rather than a proper deity. The Imperial cult has so many different facets to appease so many different cultures that a human being trying to make another god might just flow back into that worship empowering the Emperor. Even if it does make a new god, they'll be small stuff for a long time. Sure, they may be able to shield your world well enough, hell, maybe even your whole sector, but at a large scale, you need to convince the rest of humanity to also worship this new god that popped up, which is super heresy. Assuming the Inquisition doesn't have you killed and starts sending Grey Knights after your new fledgling deity, the average Imperial probably won't convert just because you say it's a good idea. As for empowering a current deity to become more powerful, that once again runs into the issue of the Chaos Gods almost certainly not allowing that. Talva is fairly small fry at this point. The prayer and belief flowing into it are those of a galactically speaking small empire. The Chaos Gods likely just don't see much reason to go all out against it yet. Whether or not that's a mistake still has to be seen, but for now they probably don't care. If it gets to a point where they're worried, that's when things like Nurgle deciding to dick with the Tau a bit are going to be upgraded to Black Crusades being launched into the Tau Empire. Same for the World Spirit of Fenris or whatever the hell is going on there. As it stands, it keeps Fenris safe-ish, and that's about it. If it got strong enough to protect multiple planets or systems, Cass is going to smack it down even harder than Magnus already did. There's also plain and simple not very many options to choose from, and some of the existing things people think are deities are really just demons, so that further complicates things. The Tau and some primitive humans on a world they controlled worshipped a fertility god to end a drought. It turned out to be the great unclean one, Rodigus Rainfather, who predictably turned the planet into a disease-ridden swamp. Trying to find another god to turn into an emperor figure might just get you rained on with feces and sewage. Not exactly ideal. But what if the emperor isn't a god? Or rather, wasn't one? A Catan shard claimed he was just a weapon, and they're fairly knowledgeable on the topic of weapons. Now, this theory isn't terribly likely because there are multiple people that have spoken to the Emperor prior to humanity even leaving Earth. It was still called Earth when they talked to him, for that matter, and the Catan could have also just been lying. They're hardly friendly towards humanity. Consider, however, that the Emperor isn't exactly a truthful fellow either, but what he is an incredibly powerful psyker who can alter the minds and perceptions of everyone around him. If you really want to go with this theory being possible, it's entirely feasible to assume he could have falsely altered the memories of people like Erda and the other Perpetuals to have them believe he'd always been around. Even if giving them memories of abandoning him due to disagreements is kinda weird, it would go towards making them see him on another level. Implanting memories of him being this all-powerful being they knew even before mankind went to space, when in reality, he's just a particularly powerful creation of humanity's golden age. Morally dubious and potentially counterproductive? Sure, but it keeps him looking impressive, you can't deny that. This is the simplest beyond all other options for Emperor 2.0, because if it's true, then you could legit just go find the Emperor Creator 3000 in a box somewhere. For as degraded as humanity's industrial base is, and as rare as Dark Age of technology remnants are, humanity was spread across the galaxy. If the Emperor really is nothing more than some absurdly powerful weapon that attained godhood through worship and more, then making another one is as simple as finding whatever made him in the first place. This theory doesn't have any of the various issues that plague the rest of the ways to get another Big E. Instead, however, it just has the least likely to be completed checklist that has to be in place before you can do it. Check 1 is that the Emperor wasn't a one-off unique weapon. We can safely assume he didn't just come out of any old STC, because then there'd be 50 of them running around, but if he came from something that was a one-off project, then we're doomed. Check 2 is that the thing that created him still exists and hasn't been destroyed by something like the Men of Iron, or degraded to the point of uselessness due to time, or been corrupted by chaos, or any number of different things. For all we know, the machine that made Big E is currently sitting in Camera along with the Panacea STC, in which case that thing is never seeing the light of day again. Check 3 on that topic is finding it. Just because it exists doesn't mean you can find it, and while a galaxy of treasure means it might be out there, it's also an entire galaxy full of horrors you need to search to find your prize. Check 4 is to see if you can even use it. The Mechanicus doesn't like people taking around with Dark Age tech not just because they're greedy resource hoarding dicks, but because they're literally the only people with a semblance of a chance of making it reliably work. The Emperor machine might have a hidden setting where instead of creating an Emperor, it just detonates the black hole at the center of the galaxy. Or it requires some absurdly complicated and rare alloy forged during the Dark Age of technology that the Imperium physically can't make anymore. Check 5 is then halting the entire galaxy that's going to rush you down the moment you turn it on. Even assuming it doesn't cause a deadly power spike or warp signature or whatever so large you can see it from Andromeda, creating another God Emperor is the sort of thing that'll send anyone who can read the future into a panic attack. Farseers, Lords of Change, people with the Emperor's Tarot, anyone with the remotest ability to see the future is likely to have an investment in not letting you make another Big E. And check 6 is to convince the second weapon this thing made to try and become an Emperor and/or God, preferably with without telling them what happened to the first one that tried. If you somehow manage to check all of these things off, then congratulations, you've made yourself another God Emperor of mankind. Ideally, this one will be a bit more polite about conquering the galaxy, and if you'd like my advice, make sure they're a bit more polite with their kids if they have any. But maybe you don't want to find some ancient technology, or find methods of making gods, or go through the hoops of gathering thousands of people and then telling them all to build a bridge and jump off it. After all, there's plenty of god power already in the galaxy. And what's more, the Emperor himself once almost certainly stole some of it to become even stronger. Why don't you take a page from his very own playbook and just grab some of it? You'll steal it. No one will ever know. After all, that's what Moloch was all about. Big E walked in pretty damn powerful and came out even more damn powerful. I'm sure you can already see the issue, though. That old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, is the problem here. The Chaos Gods already had some asshole come waltzing into their house and stealing their Energon cubes or whatever the Emperor did. They're probably not going to let someone else do the same thing. Even if you could find something similar to Moloch, chances are you just walk into the warp and get obliterated. Hell, off the top of my head, I can't remember if Slaanesh was around when the Emperor took the power he did from Chaos, so on top of them now being aware, there's decent odds you'd have to deal with one more Chaos God than he did. You'd also have to be powerful enough and full of enough will to pull it off. The God Emperor of mankind is called the Anathema by Chaos both because he's pretty good at beating them up in a fight and because his nature is inherently harmful to them. You are not the Anathema. You are just a dude. A dude who can be corrupted or killed by any wandering demons, much less the full attention of one of the Chaos Gods themselves. But go ahead if you think you got the chops for it. Honestly though, if you can walk into the realm of chaos and steal the god's power, you probably don't need it to make a new one. You are a god at that point, just keep what you stole. Stealing power from a non-chaos god, or even enough physically powerful people to try to ascend, is also rather unlikely, although if you could find a way to absorb psyker powers into yourself, that might be easier. If you pull it off a few times, you'll be stronger than almost any other further psykers you come across, turning it into a snowball of absorption. Like how Cell had to be sneaky at the start of the Cell saga, and then by the time he absorbs Android 17, he absolutely mollywomps Piccolo. Granted, this would probably make you go insane, either from the souls you're absorbing, the warp getting more and more turbulent alongside your power increasing, demons messing with you, or some combination of all three. But hey, maybe it'll work out for you, and if you cap yourself out at Primarch levels, you're still stronger than basically everyone. As for non-gods, there is the upside that if you steal the power of someone like Kegarak, then it won't be corruptive chaos power. It'll just be divine power that you probably aren't equipped to handle still, but at least you'll just explode instead of exploding and then your soul turning into slurry. And of course you'll have to deal with the faction whatever god you're trying to steal from not letting you do so. Pick your poison, Custodes, Clowns, or Plague Bearers, since if you want to go for Isha, you need to also deal with Nurgle. Now the question remaining is why haven't any other species in the galaxy attempted to make their own God Emperor of mankind? More than zero actually have in their own way, so we'll go through the factions and see what that looks like for everyone. The Eldar are all up first because I'm predictable. The Dark Eldar never ever would do this, because anything that relates to the warp is absolutely forbidden within the bounds of Kamara. If you were a Dark Eldar and told another one you wanted to make a god, they'd either just laugh and call you mean names or have you tortured for eternity, depending on how seriously they took you. As for the rest of the Eldar factions, it depends on exactly who they are for the specifics. The Harlequins already have a god, Kegarak, so they're not usually going to be looking to do something like this. We'll come back to that usually, though. The Exodites are largely content when they aren't being attacked, and probably wouldn't do anything relating to making a god out of fear of disrupting their maiden world's world spirit. Corsairs are too busy having fun, so they're out too, but the Craftworlders are where things get interesting. As much as the Inari plotline is famously dog shit, it was exactly what this video was talking about. It even went with the Shaman route, with Eldrad taking the souls of every Eldar dedicated psyker he could find out of their infinity circuits to bring about the birth of Iniad. While it mostly failed, and indeed failed so hard that Eldrad has just straight up gone back to Ulthwé in the latest lore, it was still the Eldar attempting to bring about a new god. Iniad may be Eldar heresy for some, since a death cult can only be so popular amongst a dying race, but he certainly still counts. Eldrad had help from some Harlequins too, so if nothing else, if it's on Kegarak's orders, they're willing to start mucking about with a Divine too. Since they have at least a few members of their pantheon still around too, they have and potentially can go about bringing their gods back into prominence in a variety of ways. A group of Farseers outright invaded Nurgle's garden once to rescue Isha, and they got a lot farther than you might think for an invasion of a Chaos God's backyard. Kain is also still around, albeit shattered, so there's the possibility they could bring him back to something resembling his former self through some ritual to combine various Craftworld's avatars of Kain. The Eldar themselves aren't much willing to do that, though, since as Jane Zar put it, they aren't going to be servants to their gods again. Not to Cain specifically anyways, who is a tremendous asshole, so I can't blame them much. As for their other gods, there could be rituals or something performed to free them from Slaanesh's stomach. It would by no means be easy, or who knows if it's even possible, but on the other hand, they did make a new god. Who's to say they couldn't free an existing one? Cain in the end times partially survived and could have been reformed if Morathi didn't steal all the prayers that would have brought him back. Maybe something similar could be done with the one Slaanesh ate. Maybe there's artifacts the Eldar can pray around to bring their deities back. That, of course, could just result in Eldar prayers and power going to Slaanesh instead of their gods, though, similar to how Morathi stole it, so maybe it's best to not try it. The Tau have their own greater good god thing going on, but they themselves have no interest in this sort of thing. At present, they're still trying to do what the Emperor did and spread enlightenment across the galaxy, and with the latest few sphere expansions, it's having about the same level of success as Big E had originally himself. Maybe one day when the Ethereals can't hide the nature of reality anymore, they'll change their minds on gods, but until then, it's atheism for you, Chief. The Tyranids are a hive mind, so I hope you're not expecting much. There is no such thing as worship, they're just individual cells in the hive mind. The hive mind itself probably doesn't want to make another being that would amount to a rival hive mind, and who knows if it's even possible. Tyranids, when separated from the hive mind, revert to animalistic instinct, and so the whole debacle, even if the hive mind did try to make a sibling of sorts, might just result in a whole lot of Tyranid biomatter that has to be recycled. And since Genestealer cults are just an entire army under the Tyranids, I'm gonna lump them together with the Tyranids proper. If there's a passage where worship of the Four-Armed Emperor actually granted powers unrelated to the Tyranids or the Emperor himself that I've missed, then I apologize. All of the devoted warbands have their own gods. They are not making another one. Undivided warbands and legions such as the Wordbearers, meanwhile, by and large like chaos as it is, so why try and cause strife with creating a whole-ass other being? The two standouts to that may be interested in the process are the Iron Warriors and Dark Mechanicus, but perhaps less for worship purposes and more for the fact that a god would be a hell of a thing to make a demon engine out of. Plus, Vashtor already exists, so any attempts those groups in particular might make would likely just end up empowering him instead, given their natures. Vashtor himself, meanwhile, unless I've misread, is looking for some old one's stuff to ascend to godhood, going the route of stealing stuff from Grandpa's attic to become a deity. The Necrons are another fat no on this front. They physically can't. The Tau do have a psychic presence of a small one, so they in theory could make a god if you stripped away their entire cultural identity, but the Necrons ain't got souls, so they cannot possibly make a god in the warp. Now there is the possibility that the Necrons could craft a being so powerful it's basically a god, and remaking a Catan itself would be as easy as bringing all of one's shards back together. That possibility will remain only as a possibility, however, because the Necrons shattered the Catan for a reason. They're not fans of the machine gods that stole their souls, so putting them back together is not likely. That's not to say that the Catan shards themselves wouldn't like to be made whole again, but that's a process they have to do themselves. Any attempt by some random mortal looking to recreate a Catan are likely to have every Necron dynasty within arm's reach bearing down on them, so if you wanted to go that route instead of the other ones, I would advise against it. The Orcs meanwhile seem pretty content with their gods, so why would they make more of them? One's brutal and cunning, the other is cunning and brutal. Who needs more than that? That being said, there is admittedly the theory that the Emperor is only alive because the Orcs believe De Strongest Doomy is still alive, so maybe if you gaslit every Orc into thinking you were a deity, it would work and ascend you to godhood. But Commissar Yarrick himself only got as far as being seen as the best Void ever, and to my knowledge he has yet to ascend to godhood, and you are certainly no Commissar Yarrick, so the chances of this actually working are slim at best. And in the process of convincing the Orcs you're a god, you'd also have to, not get crumped. Much harder said than done, that. And unless I've had a brain hemorrhage and forgotten a faction, admittedly a strong possibility, the last one is the Leagues of Votann. They would be going the building gods route, but they aren't too likely to run into the same issues as the Necrons with building Catan. Despite the Votann being AI, they appear in the warp as mini Astronomicons, which means even if they don't have a soul proper, they have something resembling one. While whatever the hell one might need to create a new Votann is going to be damn hard to get their hands on, it was done once, and it can be done again. They've degraded the least out of any offshoot human faction, since they are technically abhumans, so if there's anyone who can build their equivalent of a god, it would be these guys. As for ascending past what a Votann is and creating an Emperor or Chaos God tier deity, I'm not sure as to the possibility of that. I imagine a Votann could achieve something similar to Catanhood, and since they're so powerful, they may well count as close enough already. I imagine a Votann ascended to true godhood would be an interesting middle ground between a warp god and a Catan. It has total mastery over neither the warp nor the material world, but it also isn't weak to either and can manipulate both with ease. That seems appropriately dwarfy, doesn't it? After all, only the finest of crafts dwarfship will suffice. And those are the ways to make an emperor, or at least some sort of equivalent god, and why it turns out it's quite hard to just pop out another emperor of mankind. For all the shit I give him, he's quite special, and making another one of him isn't just something you can do. That being said, it would be incredibly funny if GW released a Primaris Marine Emperor of Mankind. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the worshippers to my Warhammer-style god, giving me the power I need to continue on. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. The Emperor, more like the Smelperer. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and I hope you enjoyed reading this essay as much as I enjoyed writing it.